she's going to give an address that I think is extremely timely given the days that we live in. So without further ado, I want to welcome Lorna Goldberg.
Good morning, everyone. Today, I am going to be speaking on the subject, We Disagree, Let's Talk, Why Diversity and Dialogue Are Necessary, and How We Overcome Undermining Factors. Unlike closed cult groups, ICSA is firmly committed to freedom of expression, freedom of mind, openness, and dialogue. This stated goal, originally articulated in a message from the directors to the membership 5 years ago, expresses a commitment to listening and responding to those with diverse points of view. For the International Cultic Studies Association, this means listening and responding with respect to those who have left a wide array of cults, to those who come from many different kinds of families within and outside of cults, to those who remain in cults, and to those who are professionals, including clinicians, researchers, attorneys, clergy, and journalists. In their message, the directors hope to overcome and move beyond polarization that had existed for years between ICSA members and those not in ICSA, who held contrasting views of high-demand groups. Members of ICSA generally defined high-demand groups as destructive cults and emphasized harm to cult members. Others, mainly sociologists, defined high-demand groups as new religious movements and generally focused on the group practices as neutral social phenomena rather than on the effect the groups had on its members. Also, in the early years of ICSA, formerly the American Family Foundation, the typical view, particularly expressed by mental health professionals outside, was that people join cultic groups because of some weakness of character or because they were separating from troubled families. Early ICSA members fought back against this blame the victim approach. We believe that manipulative leaders with narcissistic agendas deceive people who were recruited into cults. Family members like myself were relieved to learn about the cult dynamics that were in large measure responsible for otherwise inexplicable changes in our loved ones when they became recruits. Over time, ICSA began to see potential for cult recruitment in a more complex way, both individual as well as stage of life vulnerability and cult manipulation, and other factors as well have their role. Each might provide important information in helping to explain the cult phenomenon. A more nuanced understanding helped move our organization to a less polarized view and led to an increased willingness to reach out to those with differing viewpoints. In their message, which can be found on the ICSA website, the directors state the following: The benefits of dialogue are the converse of the negative effects of polarization. Communication increases knowledge, broadens perspectives, and enhances one's capacity to understand and appreciate the complex interpersonal dynamics of people who have left or are still in cultic groups, and it might help us better relate to those who have endured. When groups of helpers and researchers with different perspectives and foci have open boundaries, people belonging to those disciplines will feel less pressure to conform, and conversely will feel freer to pursue new ideas or innovative approaches to treatment. When one has regular contact to those holding differing views, one is more likely to recognize one's opinions as opinions and not mistakenly treat them as facts. When boundaries between helpers and researchers are open and characterized by much cross-border traffic, dubious groups or dubious individuals within groups cannot so easily exploit the situation. I agree with this message, which has value not only for our organization, but also for the wider world. I believe in general that conflict can be a healthy phenomenon, and dealing with it can help each of us gain new insight into others as well as ourselves. However, ICSA also believes in the free choice and safety of our members. Today, I am talking about dialogue. I am not talking about subjecting yourself to a person whose goal is to manipulate or intimidate you. Nothing I will say today is meant to encourage you to permit yourself to be exploited or bullied. Although ICSA sees the value in being able to engage respectfully in dialogue with people who have different perspectives, we also recognize that some views or people attempt to violate the human rights and dignity of others. In these cases, it is wise for us not to engage. ICSA conferences provide an open arena for people from different backgrounds with diverse points of view. At our conference, opinions expressed by those who are speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of ICSA or its directors, staff, advisors, or supporters. Today we can celebrate the fact that conference attendees see the issue of psychological manipulation and abuse in cults in differing ways. The philosophy articulated by its directors that being part of the ICSA community will involve disagreements over perceptions, beliefs, and goals, not only with people outside ICSA, but also within our own organization. Over the years, the population of ICSA has changed dramatically. Growing numbers of people born and raised in cults have entered our network. At the same time, ICSA has welcomed the increased numbers of mental health professionals, researchers, clergy, journalists, and attorneys who are interested in cultic issues. Each of these groups has emerged to articulate their own particular perspective, beliefs, and goals. How do we deal with this new reality? How do we ensure that each population respects the others and is respected itself? In today's presentation, I will consider some factors that undermine dialogue, and I will suggest some ideas that might help us connect our black and white world. As a psychoanalyst, my perspective is that unconscious as well as conscious factors always are at play in our interaction with others, and that these factors can undermine dialogue. For example, when I was asked to give this plenary, I became aware of a certain degree of anxiety about your reaction to my presentation. I allowed myself to consider what might be underlying my anxiety. I began to understand that I imagined you would have a critical reaction. To comfort myself, I challenged my black and white emotional thinking with self-reflection gained from years of my own therapy and from the use of self-analysis that has been central to my work as a therapist. Moving from an emotional to a self-reflective state allowed me to calm down, and I had the following thoughts. First, even if many of you respond critically, in contrast to situations in my early life, today I'm pretty good about accepting criticism. So it was unlikely that I would be crushed by your reaction. Second, although some of you might take issue with some of my ideas, others might possibly have a positive reaction to some of what I say. Third, my self-esteem would increase simply if I took the uncomfortable action of presenting rather than declining to speak. These thoughts move me from an emotional state to self-reflection and help me shift from viewing myself as the potential victim of your crushing reaction to a more balanced and hopefully realistic view. In light of this, I began to consider Jessica Benjamin's concept of the third. Benjamin suggests that too often we divide our emotional world between feeling like a victim who is done to or the victimizer who is the doer. We are stuck in right, wrong, dominant, submissive, binary thinking. We see this kind of thinking today in world leaders who would negotiate as if everything is a zero-sum game. Their attitude is, if you win, I lose. The only way to go up is for others to go down. Benjamin believes that instead, by using self-reflection, we can claim an equal place within our relationship with others. Instead of a divided way of seeing the world, we can approach new situations in such a way that everyone has the possibility of gaining something from the experience. Earlier, I talked about my anxiety when I first considered giving this plenary address. In psychoanalytic terms, in making an assumption about the audience's reactions, I was experiencing a transference reaction, transference expectation. That is, instead of looking at all possible outcomes, my sense of reality became limited by my expectation that you would react in a manner similar to reactions I experienced in my early life. Transference is a core concept of psychoanalysis. It means that unconsciously we transfer attitudes and expectations developed in the past to our present life and relationships. A psychoanalytic approach focuses on transference and centers upon how we might distort our present relationships based upon how we view relationships in the past. Often these expectations are developed in childhood when our thinking tends to be black and white, lacking the nuance and subtlety we gain as we mature. But transference expectations can also form as a result of important relationships made later in life, particularly in traumatic relationships. Transference also can lead us to possibly mishearing or misunderstanding each other, and this misperception can undermine successful communication. This happens because our past constantly reshape how we view our present. Former cult members, we have an expectation, both conscious and unconscious, that new relationships will repeat the victim-victimizer dynamics that occurred in the cult. However, as you can see by my example, you don't have to be a former member of a cult to have these particular expectations. While some individuals here, including myself, never were in a cult, as anxious humans, we all are vulnerable to regress into black and white thinking of childhood that cults intensify. With transference expectations, we can make assumptions and fill in the gaps in what we know about who people are and what they are thinking. This limits our ability to see others as we are not seeing the real person before us, an individual with strengths and flaws. Likewise, with transference expectations, we limit our ability to see ourselves in a more complex and realistic way. When we contrast ourselves to an idealized cult leader, therapist, or others, we magnify our own shortcomings. Conversely, when we need to protect ourselves, we can become suspicious and expect nothing but bad from others. When we see ourselves and others in a more balanced manner, we can acknowledge our flaws without losing sight of our strengths. So how do we move from a reactive and defensive response that incorporates black and white expectation that either we will be badly treated by a powerful other or will be speaking with an idiot or an arrogant jerk? How do we handle powerful emotions such as dread or anger that might have originated in our early life, or in the cult, or both, and replace these emotions with a response of thoughtful curiosity? How do we do that? Well, Benjamin has the answer. Benjamin suggests that we encounter people with different and even opposing views from ours. We need to recognize our own participation in this conflict and this will allow us to negotiate our differences and to connect. In other words, if we pause, taking a breath, and gives ourselves the time to consider that we might be having a transference reaction, such as in the readiness to see ourselves as victims in an experience, we can begin to see alternative ways of looking at a situation. This recognition might allow us to feel less avoidant or hopeless about a potential interaction. We can view self-reflection as a process that provides us with the mental space for thinking things through. I can use my own self-reflection and internal conversation as a stepping stone to figure out how I can best see the situation more realistically, to converse with others without being defensive. After years of personal therapy, I sometimes can take this step. However, I very often slip and stay immersed in emotion. This is a hard thing to do. I know that I'm not the only one who struggles with this issue. This step into thinking might be particularly difficult for those who've been involved in past relationships, where asserting a contradictory point of view was dangerous and could lead to punishment or shaming. Whether it was through a tyrannical parent, a manipulative partner, or a narcissistic cult leader, many people have learned that the only way to survive was through dissociation or other forms of defense against prohibited thoughts. This might make it difficult to gain conscious awareness of transference expectations, of punishment and shame. It can be hard for all of us to move from a world where the only one person can be right into a world of ambiguity where there can be a myriad of rights. Even if it is risky, I believe that when we attempt to understand those who are different from us, we have the possibility of expanding our sense of reality. In many circumstances, we can gain from showing flexibility of thinking and empathy. We don't have to fear subjecting our identity to others or becoming stuck in their viewpoint. Rigidly held views undermine the possibility for a richer understanding of our world. We're family and group-oriented. Our desire to be part of a group has aided our survival and has been adaptive for different species and for the human race. The danger is that we are apt to experience positive feelings about the groups to which we belong and less positive feelings about those groups to which we don't. We tend to see our own groups as superior to others. Cult leaders prey upon these emotions to cement loyalty to the group. Our sense of vulnerability can cause us to identify more powerfully with our own group. When there is trouble between groups, in order to feel safe, we tend to retreat to our own. While entrenched in our own groups, we might be more apt to see members of other groups in stereotypical ways instead of seeing them as individuals. Stereotyping works in a similar way to transference. We react to someone based on expectations we have developed in the past. In marital therapy, sometimes when one partner in a relationship lacks understanding of the other, it is important to identify how a diverse culture might be influencing the behavior and meaning of each partner's experiences to increase the couple's awareness of some of the roadblocks in their interaction. Depathologizing behaviors by seeing their connection to past experiences can reduce shame in one partner while increasing understanding in the other. It is vital in this process to avoid applying cultural stereotypes to either partner. Even when one partner is behaving in ways that might be considered typical of his culture, it is important to understand the particular ways in which he internalized certain aspects of the culture and how this internalization is influencing his behavior and his experience of others. The Director's Dialogue of 2015 addresses the human tendency to stereotype as a hindrance to listening to a person with a divergent viewpoint. They write, stereotyping can provide short-term comfort, for it requires less thought than analysis that recognizes the complex dynamics of cultic groups. But stereotyping inevitably leads to polarization, which reinforces stereotyping. More useful than labels are questions followed by good faith discussion. What does he say is more fruitful question than in what category does she belong? If we simply view groups as central indicators of identity, we can form conclusions about an individual that might be mistaken. I will describe myself as an example of this. I joined ICSA because I am the older sister of a former cult member. I am a Jewish clinical social worker who also is a psychoanalyst. I live in New Jersey, and I am a proud member of the Democratic Party. My identity has been shaped to some degree by all these groups, and I suspect that those of you who don't know me may form instant positive or negative impressions about me based upon what you just heard. We might be ready to dismiss the inside of a person based on our impressions about outer criteria. But this can provide us with false understanding of others. I would say more important than any of these outward descriptions is my character, the person who I am inside. It might tell you more about me if you knew that as a young child I spoke with a lisp, in part because of reactions to this. I became a very shy child. This lisp is connected to my anxiety today about public speaking. There it is. I spent my childhood immersed in books, and I reached out to those books that resonated within me. Reading and loving all the Nancy Drew books allowed a shy girl to imagine what it would feel like to be an adolescent who bravely plowed ahead to solve all sorts of mysteries with her friends. Mysteries taught me problem solving and sparked my natural curiosity and wonder about the mysteries of the human mind. In early adolescence, I read about another early adolescence. I read The Diary of Anne Frank. This book allowed me to appreciate the importance of positive relationships, even a relationship with a diary, to deal with terrifying times. After having made friends with many different people and in literature, ICSA has allowed me to make friends with many different people living throughout the United States and throughout the world. This has been one of the many benefits of ICSA. Although we might look different on the outside and speak different languages, we share many common values and interests. Having friends from many different cultures, religions, and ethnicities, even some Republicans, has broadened my perspective in a way that would have been lost if I simply made friendships for my own demographic. Encountering diversity has allowed me to see myself in others. I believe that the ICSA community offers the opposite of ethnocentrism. While this is a time of increasing ethnocentrism in the world, we might consider that instead of using cultural differences simply as a tool to dehumanize and claim superiority over others, exploration of cultural differences can be a starting point for gaining insight into our own biases and inner beliefs. An example of dialogue between subgroups. As many of you know, my husband Bill and I have facilitated a support group for former cult members at our home for over 40 years. In the last years, our support group members have included many people born and raised in cult groups, as well as former cultists who became parents in cult groups. Initially, transference attitudes initiated strong, unspoken emotions between these two groups. Two of the cult parents who expected to be blamed by the other group members for cult treatment of children described feelings of shame, guilt, despair, and regret for harm to their children while in the group. Those born and raised in cults who previously had the transference expectation that the cult parents would minimize cult harm, instead began to feel empathy for the cult parents. This discussion helped former cult member parents deal with their feelings of shame, and former members born into cults deal with their feelings of anger. Things aren't always as we perceive them to be. It takes time to understand another person, and we have to resist thinking we know when we actually are in the process of learning. I need to remind myself that if I say, she's a typical mental health professional, researcher, attorney, or cleric, I am dehumanizing and stereotyping the person before me, even if I say it with affection. If I theorize about a cult person or situation too quickly, I am using a shorthand method and maybe missing the boat. Theories may make us feel more comfortable by giving us the feeling that we know, but we do a disservice to the people with whom we are interacting. As a therapist, I believe that my clients should bring me to the theory rather than the other way around. In other words, We should not let our expectations shape our reality. Why are we talking now? So why are dialogue and diversity necessary? In the days ahead, we will each be interacting with individuals who may have vastly different backgrounds and possibly even views that are opposed to our own. I would say, based upon my decades in this organization, that the people you meet here, no matter how different they seem, can all actually be seen to some extent as heroes for their tremendous achievements. They are first-generation former cult members who were courageous enough to leave despite hearing frightening stories of the outside world and despite having to face the painful fact that they have given over years to a false messiah. They are second and multi-generational former cult members who, despite the need to adapt to a whole new culture, bravely left the only world they had ever known. They are families who are intrepid in finding different ways to keep contact with those in the cult and thus ensuring their loved ones that they will have a caring home on the outside. They are mental health professionals who often for a low fee have made it possible for former cult members to tell their story. They are attorneys who have fought for cult members' rights, former cult members' rights. They are researchers who have provided us with good science and who've written eloquently about the dynamics of these groups and the after effects of cult life. They are clergy who have helped former cult members deconstruct how cult scripture has twisted mainstream Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, or Islamic belief. They are journalists who have told the stories of those who have been harmed. They may be sociologists or even representatives of cultic groups who come here openly, taking the courageous step of entering these halls, filled with people who generally might be opposed to them or their views. The ICSA director's right. Uh-oh. You'll never know. Dialogue is premised on humility. If I deem myself to be imperfect, value truth, and have a set of beliefs, then I ought to be open to discussion with those who do not share these beliefs. I cannot correct myself if I do not allow myself to be challenged. We need diversity in dialogue because as intelligent or educated or experienced as we may be, we don't know everything. We need to recognize our vulnerabilities and our blind spots. We will only be able to hear one another if we move past assumptions and our self-righteousness. Instead, we need to be humble, remembering that we all are equals deserving respect. Let's remember that the person who might have just said something that appears to be offensive or ridiculous might be opening the door into a new way of seeing the world. Thank you.
may be off. I think most of the people appreciated it. So the stream session is now over. Thank you to those of you outside in the rest of the world for watching the streaming. We hope to do more virtual events in the future, and if you wish to be notified of such, please go to our e-newsletter, sign up on ICSAHome.com, that's ICSAHOME.com. So we have some time for questions. I'm going to moderate those. I will ask you, please, we know the distinction between a narrative and a statement and a question. So if somebody begins to enter into their own speech, I may interrupt you, but otherwise I'm sure everyone will be appropriate and handle themselves accordingly. So, any thoughts, questions regarding Lorna's talk? Yes, all the way in the back. And I'm going to ask you to speak really loudly.
Okay, I just wanted to say thank you to Lorna and thank you to the board, because there have been times that we've brought up squabbles among different groups of people in ICSA, and there's been some confusion about how to be respectful and address things, and it just feels really good and validating to have you take the time to have this discussion with us and to make a point of saying how much dialogue and mutual respect matters. So I feel very heard, and like this is a good, safe organization because we're continuing to do this work to point out what a good standard is. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And as you know, I didn't interrupt you. I won't interrupt anyone who heaps praises on Lorna.
Elizabeth, I thank you for that. I want you to know that I didn't come up with this idea on my own. This came out of the last conference we had, and a concern by people in leadership of ICSA that there was division between some of the subgroups. So I was asked to give this talk. I was told the topic, but it really came out of a concern that the leaders of the organization had because of the misunderstandings and frictions among the subgroups. We wanted to address it. So thank you. I'm glad that you feel that you responded to Elizabeth.
Steve, yeah, please.
So I want to say, Lorna, you and Bill helped me 42 years ago. So much. So thank you. And I'm reflecting over all these decades from being in meetings where OSA people would threaten me in the meetings to a much more safer place, which is great. And it's a work in progress because all those years I felt like the academics that were speaking here disregarded ex-members' experiences. Like they would go and ask cult members, are you happy in the Moonies? Oh yeah, I'm really happy in the Moonies. Oh, well, people are happy and people leave. But disregarding, and so what I'm saying is I'm really happy that things have gotten to where it is, but I think we also are at a work in progress because we want to make it safe for ex-members to be in a space where there are members of controversial groups. And I think we just have to keep talking. And I think especially in the political atmosphere that we're living in the world and social media, it's too much putting each other down instead of listening. So thank you for your talk.
Okay, yes, there has been a change, and I remember the early meetings when Eileen Barker bravely came here. And it was hard. But, you know, what's happened recently is that we have been listening to each other, and to this time at the conference I met Eileen, and I thanked her because she had reached out to me, someone that sees her work with people as people from destructive cults, to include me, among others, Linda Rod and Joe Zimhart, in a book written by, edited by informed people, and bringing our point of view into their book. And I was very appreciative. Now I have a copy of the book, and it's very informative, and I wasn't, whatever I said, nothing was edited out. So that happened because we've been listening to each other over the years, even if it's been hard.
Yes. What was that?
I see a parallel between the diversity within ICSA.
I'm going to ask you to shout.
Okay. I see a parallel in the diversity within ICSA and the diversity in the interfaith movement with many different groups. Do you think there could be a discussion between the two on what is a healthy spirituality?
You mean in terms, what is a discussion about?
Healthy spirituality?
I'm going to defer to Bob Harden for that.
You're doing fine.
He's not here.
He is.
Where is he? Come on
Yeah, I do think there is a lot to be gained from those kind of conversations. We already are having, I believe, here in ICSA, some that at least are on the fringes of that kind of approach. But I'm not quite so certain that there are the individuals who really want to participate in that. But I do think it is a very, very good thing to do. And we begin, I think, partly by starting internally from our own perspective and what's healthy within that, and then broadening out to be able to speak in the context of, okay, how do we interface with others in a way that's healthy for each individual in each group versus kind of setting up boundaries in that. You don't have to always agree on things, but you do want to be able to dialogue and have that kind of conversation. So I think that's an excellent idea.
I just want to point out that my husband and I are doing a session tomorrow at 9 o'clock about our perspective on spirituality and healthy spirituality. Throw that out there.
Is that a question, Wendy?
Yeah, Wendy's just an accident.
Made it clear.
There is, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'd just like to point out that I'm a second generation, Bill and Lorna. Our son got us out of a destructive cult after he had gone to their group before us. So there's a huge intergenerational length to what Bill and Lorna have been doing. So I just can't express how much our family has to thank Bill and Lorna. And my question is, how can we reach to families that are broken, and I know you're having a talk on that, and never get to see their children, and that's the tragedy. How can we help those parents?
Now, are you talking about parents who come out of cults? And they're broken? It's very hard because you know, parents can write to their children or try to be in touch with them, but if the ball is in the children's court because there's a lot of anger there. They felt both neglected and abused in the group, and even if the parents were under the leader's control, there still is anger at the parents for not protecting them more. You and Gunilla have bravely come forward and even came to our group, and I think I can say, you know, spoke with second generation within the group, and that was a wonderful thing. But I think that those parents that are truly remorseful and truly can empathize with second generation, their children's harm or multi-generational harm, have the possibility. And what they have to really do is create an environment of being willing to listen to what their children have to say to them, the whole thing, without rationalizing, without jumping in to justify in any way. They have to hear everything that has to be, and that's painful. So a lot of parents can't do that psychologically. It's too much for them. But those parents that can really listen to their children, create an environment. Sometimes I've had the experience of having a meeting with first generation and their children, second generation children. And that's been good because both sides have felt safe. And even before we have the meeting, we set up guidelines. I speak with the parents, I speak with the children, and we decide what we'll be talking about, what we might not be talking about, in order for both of them to feel safe discussing it. And it usually works because by that time there's motivation on both parts. I think the heartbreaking thing is that people want to have a relationship with their parents. Ideally, they want to, but they have to feel that their parents are making a good faith effort to listen to them and understand the pain that they've been through.
Yes, you.
Thank you. Had to stand up for that one. I can be loud.
Yes.
I was brought into and raised in a cult, and so I just want to say thank you, especially for what you just said. I've written my story. It's coming out on September 18th, so if any of you were in the cult I was in, you know that that's a special day. I was a Moonie. And my day job, I am a leadership consultant and executive coach. I say I'm still trying to save people. But what I love what you talk about, we talk about, well, the psychologists know I'm talking about biases. So our confirmation bias, that we only see things that confirm what we already believe, whether or not we're in a cult. And then my favorite bias is that I have no biases. Right? So we're screwed. So just you're putting out, like, how can we hear other people's truth and know that my first reaction, that they're wrong, may not be right, is wonderful. And what I say about growing up or being in a cult was, there's nothing more intoxicating than knowing you have the truth. Yeah. Those of you who know what I mean, you know what I mean, right? When you know it's true, you'll do anything. So I just want to say, I stumbled on ICSA. I'm so thrilled to be here. I went for decades not talking to anybody about it. Obviously, I'm very open now. So thank you. That's all about it.
Thank you so much for just creating this community. I was born and raised in Scientology, and for over 20 years I've supported survivors of abuse, trauma, and cults. And doing that as a way to financially sustain myself, people consistently have told me I can't say the word cult. And you're gonna scare people, and it's too intense, and change it this way, change it that way. And then I started to realize that they were oftentimes using cult-like things in their ways of teaching and didn't realize it. And so I was triggering the fuck out of everybody. But I want to thank you all who have done whatever you've done to support all of us, and especially Lorna for what Steve just said, because Steve really helped me. And I wouldn't have my children today if it wasn't for the work I've done with Steve. And all the people who I've supported wouldn't have their lives the way that they do if it wasn't for you, and then if it wasn't for you and you. So thank you for all of that. And I would love to hear from you where you hope to see ICSA within the next 10 years, because what I work on is that we're badass leaders and survivors, that it's not just one or the other. I haven't healed and now I'm magically, I work with PTSD symptoms on a daily basis. And I would love to just get a sense of the vision of where you're hoping that this moves to within the next 10 years. Thank you.
I do think that's going to get addressed throughout the remaining part of the conference, so thank you for bringing that up. Let's see, you close, please.
Again, thank you for bringing up this really important topic. I appreciate that you, Lorna, said we've begun to look. We've begun the dialogue. And I'm really curious about the fact of, when I look around the room, we're largely white Anglo group. So the whole experience of really looking deeply at implicit bias, and I think it's one thing that we look, when we do that as individuals. I'm also really curious how that occurs within the organization of ICSA in terms of how is ICSA truly meeting the needs and inviting people of all diversities. Is there a truly diverse community within ICSA? And are there ways that there might be blind spots or implicit bias that are making it not safe for the whole incredible diversity of people in this amazing country?
I think you're right. Why is this occurring? This is a wonderful thing to look at. I think in the New York area, it isn't as white, our meetings and our support group. I think probably in pockets of the country and the world, it isn't as white, but somehow, I don't know if coming to a conference can be intimidating for people. I don't know why it is, but I think it's something for us to look at as an organization, why this has happened.
Also, please don't assume that that people you see in the conference are representative of the entire membership.
People might feel more comfortable going to a support group or a local meeting in New York. If you looked at our meetings in New York, it just doesn't reflect this, but we have to figure out why that's so.
I know there are many